Hi, I'm Sarah Haberling, and this is my presentation of the investors' analysis of Senegal and Indonesia. The outline of my presentation is as followed: the historical review, the macroeconomic variables, economic development, socioeconomic variables, and doing business, developmental strategy, and conclusion and recommendations. Senegal's history is that it was a French colony and was established in 1659, but it was then lost to the British after the 7-Year War in 1763, which was eventually gotten back by the French, and they reclaimed Senegal. The Senegal people are very friendly, but very deep-rooted in their traditions, and if starting a business there, it would be recommended to get involved in the community. Senegal was ran by a socialist party for 40 years, but in 2000, it was taken over by a democratic leader. With the stable economy, Senegal remains the only country in West Africa to never have experienced a military coup where the army seizes power of the elected government. Indonesia is located in Southeast Asia, and it was colonized in the early 17th century by the Dutch. It had a lot of hardships being under the Dutch presence. In 1942, the Japanese took over and was welcomed by the Indonesian people, but they ended up experiencing more hardships with them, such as scarcity of food, clothing, forced labor. Indonesia finally gained its independence in 1949, but their democracy ended in 1957 when President Sukarno was declared martial law and began guided democracy, which was an attempt to bring more political stability because he didn't believe that Western democracy was right for the Indonesian nation. As you can see, there's the macroeconomic variables. Indonesia almost doubles Senegal's gross domestic product. It can be seen that Indonesia has much higher inflation rates, but much lower unemployment rates that have steadily decreased since 2006, unlike Senegal, which actually has gone up a little bit. Senegal's Gini coefficient is 40.29, and Indonesia is 39.47, which are both fairly typical. And economic development, and compare these two countries, Indonesia and Senegal, it is easy to see that education is more important and incorporated in Indonesia. The school life expectancy is much higher, and because in Senegal it's much more likely that they're going to drop out or go to work for the families. They start working at a much younger age than in Indonesia. Indonesia is more likely to have educated workers for a business, so probably a better investment than Senegal when it comes in this area. For economic development, both Indonesia and Senegal have secure internet servers, but Senegal is increasing pretty rapidly. It's done really well, and so is Indonesia. When concerning energy, they both have access to energy. Indonesia typically has more. It's a larger country. But Indonesia does experience a lot of blackouts, even though they have large energy resources. Indonesia has a structural problems regarding the energy supply. But even with the blackouts Indonesia does experience, it still has a much more abundant energy supply than Senegal. They also have better transportation for goods, such as the railways that are shown, and economic development is probably much higher in Indonesia than in Senegal. The socioeconomic variables, they're both civil law countries basically, but Indonesia is also intermixed with customary law. Indonesia is a very large land and it's home to many different languages and groups, and their civil law is mixed with that The old law they used to have was called a Dao law, which was what they had before they were introduced to Western civilization to experience their forms of law systems. In both countries there is corruption, but in Senegal it's much lower than in Indonesia. The level of economic corruption in Senegal that has been devastating across Africa is extremely low. Senegal has a democratic political culture. It's one of the most successful in Africa. In Indonesia, almost 91% of Indonesians say that the government has large amounts of corruption in it, making Senegal probably better when it comes to corruption variables in their business world. When it comes to developmental strategies, they both have aid and development for their countries. Indonesia has had rising economic power and a lively democracy. Indonesia's strong economic growth has contributed to an average annual poverty reduction rate of 6% in the past 5 years. While they're not eradicating poverty, they are working towards fixing it and doing very well. They want to be a co-investor with the U.S. aid for public and private institutions and create strong relationships in their government, civil society, private sector, and work with the U.S. Embassy to create Indonesia to become a more democratic power. Senegal is also working with U.S. aid, which improves the lives of people in the country, helping create jobs and make access to education and healthcare easier. But Senegal's poor infrastructure makes it really hard to get a lot of things done. They are working on it, and hopefully with aid they will be able to develop at a more rapid rate. When it comes to doing business in both Indonesia and Senegal, Indonesia beats Senegal in almost every category except starting a business, which is very difficult for non-citizens to do. It's almost impossible, actually, because it's very difficult. You have to go through an actual citizen to create a business there. But everything else makes it worth creating a business there. When it comes to getting contracts, which Senegal is ranked 139 compared to 62, or getting credit. And when it comes to enforcing contracts, Senegal is much better. But comparing all the rest of the factors, doing business in Indonesia would probably be a better investment. In Indonesia, it only takes 47 days to enforce contracts, but in Senegal, it takes about 500 days on average. And it almost takes 200 hours to complete taxes in Senegal, which is a much longer time than in Indonesia. So overall, Indonesia would probably be a better investment. They have a lot more of attractions and a lot better infrastructure, making it a better investment overall than Senegal.